Sex Talk with the Siegel Brothers is a weekly program designed to answer all your questions, including the ones you didn't even know you had, and to clarify the endless debates around the wonderful and fascinating world of sexuality. Join us for real talk about sex from two experts in the field. Richard and Larry Siegel have over 50 years of experience as sex therapists, educators, counselors, and researchers. The Siegel brothers are recognized around the world as trainers of medical and mental health professionals.
Hello and welcome to Sex Talk with the Siegel Brothers. I am Larry Siegel, a clinical sexologist and certified sexuality educator.
And I'm Ricky Siegel, a certified sex therapist.
And proud to say my brother. Welcome.
Thank you. Welcome.
Good to see you again.
To you, my
Cheers
big brother.
To you.
Cheers to you for joining us.
Indeed. Our traditional sake toast.
That is wonderful.
Right? That's an unfiltered nigiri sake with I just infused with a little plum wine.
Nicely
get a little
done.
bit of that. So
Nicely done.
yes, it's a nice drink.
So here we are for our weekly opportunity to talk all things sexual. Sexual
Indeed.
health primarily, since we seem to be lacking it in this country.
Yeah, we can throw sexual literacy on that pile as well.
Yes. So we're glad that you're here. That shows that people want to hear it, and we hope that you'll share and get others talking more about sex.
Indeed. Hit the like button, hit the share button. For those of you who are checking us out on Facebook, if you're watching us on YouTube, please subscribe, and we'd love to get your comments, whether it's on anything that we are talking about or anything you would like to hear us talking about.
Sure.
And just let us know. Okay. So it's another week in the books. Right? Quite a few interesting things happening around the world. Right? Some good things, some not so good things. We're definitely living in some interesting times. As of our recording this, I just want to give a nod because I don't think there's anything that's been more front and center in the news for the past several weeks than the what we can now truly and officially say the George Floyd murder trial. That has finally come to a close, and Derek Chauvin has been found guilty on all counts.
Good.
So, it's finally we get to see some semblance of justice that still exists. Now, if we can apply that to sexual justice, other aspects of social justice, we're definitely moving in the right direction.
Right.
But that was. I'm gonna say I'm glad for that result.
Right.
I really am. Good. So justice can still work. Here's to a justice system that isn't dead yet.
And a just outcome.
Indeed. So I'm excited about tonight's show.
Yes, we have a wonderful guest, returning guest, the brilliant Dan Water.
Yeah, who is truly a giant in the field.
Yeah.
And is definitely one of those people that we've been saying this for so long, and I know it may sound a little, I don't know, maybe a little conceited, a little arrogant, but again, we've been doing this for so long, and it's been a long time since we've been able to interact with people, see people that we would sit at their feet, that we could really, really learn from. Not that we don't learn every day, but there are some people that are just in that class, with a very, very small group of people. And Dan is most certainly one of those people.
Yeah. So we're going to be talking about one of his major contributions to the field of sex therapy, really bringing some old ideas into modern approaches, which of course at Modern Sex Therapy Institutes we like to ensure that we stay on the cutting edge, or we would be dopey using that name, right? But Dan takes some rather old school existential therapy concepts and beautifully integrates them into sex therapy. that by and large, as we'll talk with Dr. Water about, still tends to focus, like most people do, on performance and goal-oriented sex, which even while we're working with couples in sex therapy and encouraging them not to be so goal-oriented and stay in the moment and enjoy the pleasure, we still, I think, are all kind of conditioned to think on some level that, you know, if a couple is having more frequent sex, there's some relief, right? We've got a successful case. If the sexual complaints that they came in with, inability to orgasm or difficulty maintaining an erection, if those symptoms are improved, we go, oh, we're good at our job. We have another, right? But sometimes we can miss the simple message of what those symptoms are saying.
Yeah, exactly. You know, there's very much, you know, what I'm sort of thinking in my head, there's a behavior bias that this field definitely has. And I think most psychotherapy kind of has that behavioral bias, and that it's really all about what we do. And that's one of the things that's so great about Dan bringing this existential approach, especially into sex therapy, because it's one of those things that, you know, some of us have been saying most of our lives, you know, especially, you know, I remember even in my 20s, you know, and studying a lot with Buddhism, and really getting that message from that existential perspective, that we do get so caught up in being human doings that we lose sight of being human beings.
Right.
And you know what? In sexual play, in sex therapy, that is such a vital and overlooked part.
It truly is.
Right? So I don't even want to talk about this stuff anymore, because I don't think we can hold a candle to the way Dan could explain it. So without any more ado, why don't we go ahead with our interview with Dr. Dan Water.
So, hello, we are back, and with one of our favorite guests. Please welcome Dr. Dan Water. Welcome back.
Howdy.
Great to see
you. Thank you. Nice to be here. Absolutely.
Glad to have you back. Yeah, I think the last time we were still on the radio, right?
Yes. The last time was the radio.
Our own thing on YouTube, and don't have to worry about the FCC.
That's right. As we like to say, fuck the FCC.
That's right. It's much more fun talking about sex without having to worry about that greasy finger on the button. Getting bleeped, or a couple times getting dumped
A couple of times, yeah.
Yes. Just wait, why is
Wow.
that music
Yeah,
playing? Why we
that's
hear
right.
music? Oh, we're off the air. Yeah. So, like I said, it's unavoidable for me to do a little bit of sycophantic fanboy stuff, but really, you are just truly one of those presenters. I mean, we talk about this a lot, that the downside, I mean, we complain that sex therapy is too small a field, but one of the upsides is we kind of know everybody. And we have access to people we've studied when we were training, and sitting when we used to go to conferences. Hopefully we will again soon, sitting next to people whose books we've studied, and you know, it's kind of cool. But it's also a fact that a lot of the real giants, a lot of the biggest in the field, if you've heard them speak, you kind of get their shtick, right? And if you've heard them 2 or 3 times, your lips can practically move along with theirs. I have heard you lecture and present at conferences and do classes for our institutes since, as we talked about last weekend, since about 2010. And I always learn more and something new. I'm always inspired. I never get bored of hearing you speak.
Wow. Thank you.
You're in a small crowd. When I say that, I mean it sincerely. So I thank you. I definitely feel like you are one of those giants on whose shoulders I stand. And not to get too carried away with it, but honestly, when I hear you do a class, I go into therapy the following week with some of those ideas in my head, and you've been making me a better therapist for all these years.
Well, I appreciate that. And I'm glad you finished the sentence, because at first I thought you were going to say every time you hear me speak, you go into therapy.
Yeah.
And I will echo that sentiment. Those
Well,
sentiments.
thank you. Thank you both. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So, and in recent years, you've been introducing more and more to the delight of hundreds, kind of humanistic and existential approaches to sex therapy, getting more a little bit away from what's traditionally been kind of a behavioral Masters and Johnson kind of
cognitive behavioral.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe we'll just start there. How I know you've been a student and friend with such giants as Yalom and Albert Ellis. So how did existential therapy bring you, or how did sex therapy bring you back to integrate these?
So it's a good question, and it happened just kind of organically, kind of naturally. I was first trained, like most everybody else is trained in sex therapy, with a Masters in Johnson behavioral, cognitive behavioral bent, which is really pretty standard in the field. And I did my first postdoctoral training with Albert Ellis in New York in the 80s. And so I learned, RET at the time, REBT now, and that had a very, a long history of application to sex problems. People forget that, Ellis was an early sex therapist. He was the, one of the founders of, ASECT and Quad S and, some of those organizations, and he's written extensively about it. So I learned a lot about cognitive behavioral approaches to sex therapy, when I was studying there. And I practiced that way for, a number of years, very happily. And I think, successfully. I think it's a really good form of psychotherapy. But, as the years went by, and I think as I got older, and I matured more, I started to appreciate the more depth-oriented therapies in a way that I didn't when I was younger. I was introduced to Yalom's work when I was in graduate school. His book on group therapy, for example, was, very popular then. It's popular now. But I didn't get it. It didn't do much for me. I learned how to do group therapy, but I didn't appreciate the existential approaches. But as I got older, I remember picking up a book called Love's Executioner, which was a book of therapy tales, that Yalom wrote. And I thought it was a fascinating approach to therapy. It resonated for me in a very deep way. And so then I bought his book, Existential Psychotherapy, which was written in 1980. So, Yalom, who would never consider himself a sex therapist, actually, that book is loaded with case examples of people with sexual problems. And so it started to become, like this nice fit as I was watching, as he takes you through the book in terms of how he does his treatment with people presenting with sexual difficulties, sexual symptoms, and how oftentimes they are the result of some underlying existential dilemma. And I thought, well, this is just a perfect fit. What happened then, which I don't guess we'll get much of a chance to talk about today, but maybe another time, is at about the same time, I was also starting to collect a series of cases of men who came in describing themselves as sex addicts. That's the term that they used, because basically they were experiencing this explosive sexual behavior that they couldn't control. And I started to see in a lot of these cases, and I've got now a collection of about 60 or so cases of men whose sexual behavior spiraled out of control after a confrontation with mortality. And that's when it started to really click for me that, wow, this is what Yalom talks about all the time, about death anxiety, and how sex as a life force is often employed as sort of the antidote for death anxiety. Right.
So
You
you mean
don't see this.
like losing a parent at a fairly young age, right?
So
Crisis.
that would be one example. That's right. So a lot of people who lose a parent at a very young age live with this sort of fear, and this cloud over them that they're not going to live that much longer. And so I have seen several cases of men in particular, and some women too, but I've seen it mostly in men, is as they approach the age at which their father or their mother died,
Yeah.
they start to have an existential panic. You know, Mickey Mantle, is a great, example. Here's a guy who lived a life of great excess, right? And he's quoted as saying, almost in a comical way, if I knew I was going to live this long, I would have taken better care of myself, right? But what often gets lost in there is Mickey Mantle's father died at 39. And Mickey Mantle never thought he was going to live beyond that. So it's just kind of so anyway, so long story short, I started collecting a lot of these cases. I saw in particular death anxiety in these cases of hypersexuality. And so I started developing a treatment model based on, dealing less with the sexual behavior per se, the presenting symptom, and more about what was underneath that was driving it, here in this case, death anxiety. So I wrote a paper about it. I did some presentations about it. I sent it to, actually, no, that's not quite true. I had been speaking with Irv Yalom before I had published the paper about what I was seeing. And he thought, it was really very interesting because most of the cases he had worked on were people who actually were diagnosed with life-threatening illnesses. And then had sexual problems. The idea that what we could be looking at is a triggering of an early childhood trauma was what made it a little different from the work that he was doing. And he was very enthusiastic, still very supportive of the work I'm doing and the things that I'm writing. And I'm writing a book now on existential approaches to understanding men's sexual difficulties. And he's been wonderful. He goes through every page of the manuscript with me. And so that's how it happened.
So could you just a literal, 25 words or less kind of thing for people, especially a lot of students that may be watching this and people that don't quite understand what existentialism is, and especially as something that people can work on in therapy and related to sex.
Sure. So, Larry, we've known each other a long time. I can't say hello in 25 words or less, but I'm going to give it a good shot. So basically what existential psychotherapy focuses on are things that threaten our existence. I mean, that's really what it boils down to very simply. And so what happens is that when our existence feels threatened, we go into this kind of unconscious self-protective mode where we try and either pull back, shut down, whatever we need to do to avoid this threat. And in Yalom's version of existential psychotherapy, there are 4 basic threats to existence that get focused on in therapy: the lack of meaning in life, a sense of isolation, because existential therapy is a very relational form of therapy. There's this underlying belief that we need other people. We don't exist in a vacuum. We do best. We are the healthiest when our human relationships and interactions are close, connected, genuine. So it makes it a perfect fit for a lot of sexual problems.
Sure.
Freedom, which is another existential crisis. The way that comes out in sex therapy sometimes is you'll see people who, everything is fine, until they come to what I sometimes refer to as a relationship deepening event. The sex was fine, and then we moved
And they
in
got
together,
married or moved
or
in.
then we got married, or
Right,
whatever it might be. And if you've had early childhood trauma, this kind of closeness can actually feel quite dangerous, right? And so, because you can get hurt, you can be, harmed by the more connection, and then the abandonment, if that happens, is going to be, tolerated less well. And so there's this sense of being trapped or suffocated that threatens my freedom and autonomy. And then the final one is mortality, which is really what unifies them all together, because all threats to existence are essentially threats to my being alive.
right.
Is what or my sense of being alive. It doesn't have to be death literally, but it's like, if I feel trapped in a relationship, I feel suffocated. I don't feel alive. I feel like, it's like a death of sorts, So that's kind of the difference from the existential approaches with the more traditional, cognitive behavioral or behavioral approaches, is that there's very little focus on the symptom itself and much more focus on what is underneath that symptom that's driving it. So what is that's right. What's gotten triggered in you that now is making you shut down self-protectively. So it looks at sexual dysfunction as a protective shutdown device to pull you away or protect you from something that feels like a threat to your existence.
Right. I know you knew my late supervisor and mentor, Susan Lee, and I know you knew her, the woman who married her, Helen Singer Kaplan, and of course our mutual colleague, another giant in the field, Michael Perlman, also supervised Susan. So it was what I got hammered with a lot was that very behavioral Masters and Johnson kind of approach. And one of the things I took from you over the years and try and instill in my supervisees is being careful not to avoid the end run around these kind of existential issues by focusing too much on, well, he's having more reliable erections, or they're having sex more frequently, as if that itself is evidence of success, when in fact it can be quite the opposite.
Right.
Well,
yes,
can I also throw
absolutely.
in that, very ironically, isn't that one of those kind of dilemmas that existentialism is really looking to address anyway, that we get so caught up in the outcomes, in the doing, in the performance, that the whole experience and existence gets kind of just ignored.
Absolutely. I mean, that is 100%, one of the basic tenets of the existential approach to psychotherapy, is that, Viktor Frankl, who was an early, existentialist, used to say that there are certain things that cannot be pursued directly. And the more you try and pursue them directly, the more elusive they become. So for example, if you try to make yourself go to sleep, right, it's going to be harder to go to sleep, right? Because sleep is a byproduct of something else.
Letting go.
That's right. And so, and we have always said that in sex therapy, but our practice has sometimes been, sort of contradictory to that. So for example, we've been saying in sex therapy forever that you can't focus on your genitals, right? You can't will yourself an erection. You can't make yourself, lubricate vaginally. These are natural responses to sexual stimulation. Yet we design our therapy exercises on, how's your penis doing? How's your vagina doing? So it's almost like, we say one thing, but then all the interventions sort of are focused on the genital outcome, and it can be very confusing. And so so existential therapy tries to move away from those kinds of markers.
So one of these, I'm sorry, one of these that I wanted to talk about and that you brought up in your recent class this past weekend is the issue of performance anxiety. You know, it's like dogma. It's burned in the brains. 99% of sex therapists, and it really is dogmatically believed that, especially for guys, there's the training, the unwritten scripts are so focused on the doing of sex, the performance, that pleasure is sometimes even completely unimportant as long as the performance is good. So when we talk about performance anxiety, and we're fond of saying, especially to our college students, you know, the best way to lose an erection is to worry about losing your erection. Right?
Right.
So you've made this point a couple times in the past that it's a bit of a ruse for a sex therapist to focus too much or to believe that what causes erectile dysfunction is this hyper focus on not losing an erection.
Right, right. So, yeah. So I am clearly at this point in time, I'm on a crusade to make it different, but at this point in time, I am definitely in the minority of sex therapists who believe strongly that performance anxiety is important in terms of understanding what's creating the dysfunction, whether it's erectile dysfunction or any other for that matter. So what I learned, which is pretty much what we all learned, is that what causes sexual dysfunction is if someone is not functioning well sexually the way they want to or expect to, then they engage in what Masters and Johnson called spectatoring, right? Where now they're sort of watching to see what their genitals will do. They're focused on that goal orientation.
Right.
And because they're now so anxious about whether or not they're going to, get an erection, whether they're going to lubricate, whether they're going to have an orgasm, whatever it is, it's that sort of spectatoring now that creates this high anxiety, and that anxiety leads to problems with sexual function. I, in my more cynical moments, have described that as a Swiss cheese explanation. It's to me it's full of holes, and I'll tell you why. So most of the cases that I see, not all, I would never make a blanket statement like performance anxiety is never a central feature. But the vast majority of cases that I see occur in people who have long histories of perfectly fine sexual functioning.
Right.
And oftentimes they have very long histories of good sexual functioning with the person that they are now having difficulty with. So to me, if you have a history with someone of good sexual functioning, and one time your penis doesn't work the way it's supposed to, does it make sense that you are now completely derailed so you can never let that go? I mean, is that really the issue? Like, you could have years of good sexual functioning with this partner, and then you have a time when things don't work, and then you automatically go into a panic. To me, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. And so while I do believe that performance anxiety becomes an issue in the maintenance of the problems, I don't believe that that's what caused the problem. And a lot of what I see goes back to what I was describing before, which is I think that what happens is there are certain relational events that can trigger early childhood trauma, which then moves people into this self-protective shutdown. In other words, so let's say for example, just say for example that, and this is overly simplistic, but let's say for example we're talking about a man who comes from a very dysfunctional, chaotic home and feels trapped in the home. Feels like he just can't get out. His parents are smothering, or he feels like he has to be caretaker to the family or the parents or whatever. He gets out, goes to college, experiences a type of freedom and liberation that he has never experienced before, and he is just blossoming. Right? He's having a wonderful time, and he meets this woman, and they start a relationship. It becomes sexual, and it's fantastic. And after a while, she says, what do you think about getting married? We're having such a great time. And he says, yeah, that's great. Let's do it. This is so great. And then they move in, they get engaged, they get married, whatever it may be, and he can't keep an erection. Mm-hmm. How is that performance anxiety, right? To me, I would be thinking about a guy who his associations with family are back to that prison-like restrictiveness, and I don't want to get smothered and stuck again. Mm-hmm. Right. And of course, this is all happening unconscious, because almost every man that I have ever worked with in the last 35 plus years has never come in being able to tell me why his penis stopped functioning. Right. It's purely an unconscious process. But I have come to see it as serving a self-protective focus in many of the cases that I see. Of course, there are going to be cases where this doesn't apply. But that's often what you see. You will see that in cases of erectile shutdown. You'll see that often in cases of delayed ejaculation or inhibited ejaculation. And you also see it a lot of times in those no-sex marriages. In those no-sex marriages, my experience is there's plenty of sex. The man is having plenty of sex, but he's doing it by himself. Right. Almost always there are people who, have other relationships or whatever, but so many that I see, they're only relaxed enough when they're by themselves. When they're with a partner, there is this existential fear that overtakes them that they can't identify. And so they self-protectively shut down. So that's my theory on why performance anxiety has holes as an etiology of sexual dysfunction.
Right, and I think that's an important part of that as well, because I don't get that you're saying that performance anxiety has nothing to do with it and it's not real. It's just like, unlike what we have been programmed to think, it is not the ultimate cause, but it is a contributor.
Well, yes, and the reason I think that's so important is because if you go with, the way I was originally taught was performance anxiety is the problem. Mm-hmm. That is the problem. And so then if the therapy is directed towards reducing performance anxiety, it's no wonder that a lot of these cases don't resolve, or resolve for short times and then the symptoms come back, or they just result in a symptom substitution. It comes out some other way. Right. So that's why I think it's important. Performance anxiety is there, but it's a bit of a red herring, I think, when we're trying to understand why is this happening to this person.
And given what you were saying earlier as well about how, even when we're not meaning to, so much of sex therapy is performance-based. So any opportunity to use my favorite word, I'm going to take. So can performance anxiety even be iatrogenic?
Yes, the treatment of performance anxiety can absolutely be iatrogenic. Sure, because, in some ways we are creating a bigger problem by the treatments in some cases. Mm-hmm. I definitely think that.
That's a good point. Also leads to another strong point you made over the weekend that I wanted to ask you to comment more on. I think I asked you a question during the class too. You made a comment, which of course we both, I'm sure I could speak for us both, agree with tremendously, that we ought not be the arbiters of what good sex or good function is, right? But
Yes.
because of all of these scripts and this emphasis on performance and goal orientation that most people come in with that are contributing to these sexual problems, can we guide them if their idea of what good sex is in our clinical judgment not helping them?
So that's a great question, and it's kind of it's a touchy one in a sense, right? Because what traditional sex therapy does, even though it espouses that it doesn't, is it does kind of set the standard for what good sex is supposed to be, right? And you guys have probably seen, they're kind of dated now, but you remember that Better Sex video series
sure.
that was so popular, right? It was very
It's so
popular.
hard to not look like porn, right?
Right.
With the little talking.
Well, that's right.
It really
That's
did.
right. That's right. And that was done by people that we all know and respect. Are really very, very thoughtful and excellent clinicians. But I first started to think about whether what we were doing with those things. But when I was reading some of the work of Thomas Zaz, who is highly critical of the medical model of things, and even though he's a psychiatrist, and he actually specifically references those videos by saying, who are these people that claim that they have some idea about what constitutes good sex or better sex? Right. And he actually has said that asking a mental health professional or a sex therapist what constitutes good sex would be like asking your gastroenterologist for recipes. just because your gastroenterologist knows how to fix what's wrong with your stomach, it doesn't mean that they have any idea of what tastes good to you. Mm-hmm. And so the more existential approach, which is really more of it has fewer limits. It's a limitless approach, really, in terms of trying to help people discover and take responsibility for being the authors of their own lives, which include their sexual lives. Mm-hmm. So there is no preconceived notion about what constitutes good sex in the existential approach, because we don't talk about symptom resolution. We talk about symptom meaning, right? When you talk about symptom resolution, you are in essence determining what constitutes good sex. It's the removal of the symptom. And of course, a lot of times that just seems so intuitive, but existentially, we look to people to define for themselves and then be responsible for creating the life that they want, whatever it may look like.
Yeah. And, I think, the symptom relief is really, yes, it's very legitimate. There's certainly a lot to it, but it's also low hanging fruit.
Very much.
And it really is just sort of I don't know, it just sort of the quickest and easiest presentation and assessment and sort of direction, right, but not necessarily the most meaningful stuff.
You're 100% right. And I think one of the ways that we see that, we were talking about this actually before we started to tape, today, is that, there's a real ethical dilemma in working with the aging population and trying to get them to function sexually like a 30-year-old.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The idea that we would prescribe Viagra, for a 70-year-old, for example, right? I mean, look, I think people should have the option to choose the treatments they want, and that's fine. But would we, I think this is really an important question, would we be better off trying to help people successfully adjust to the stage of life that they are at, right? Because your erections are supposed to change. That's what's supposed to happen, right? And we can fight it, the fountain of youth and all that. But when you do that, you're essentially saying that the good sex is the sex of youth. The real sex is the sex of youth. And I think we do a real disservice to people. It's almost like, talk about existential dilemmas. It's almost like, Erik Erikson didn't exist. Like Erikson was great when he said, at different stages of life, you're dealing with different things. This is what's supposed to happen, right? And so as you age, sex, like every other physical function and emotional experience too, is supposed to change. It doesn't mean that it's not good anymore. It's just, it's supposed to be different. But we as a field have not embraced that.
We used to, in the old days, we used to have a lot of fun with these Sex After 60 workshops that we do at synagogues and churches and condo associations. And like 1998 and Viagra just killed it. Like all of a sudden, nobody was interested anymore. All that permission giving went away.
Although the last couple of years in the work that I've been doing with the seniors and in a lot of these residents communities and things like that, that has been the core of what I've been doing. I can say that I can break it down into two main points. One being exactly what you just said, using that term, a new normal long before COVID. And really seeing that as the foundation for working with that. And the other part that I've really been focusing on, which touches on a lot of those same issues, is how we deal with sexual intimacy, relational issues when there's dementia on the table.
You know what?
And you want to talk about an existential crisis.
That's
making
and threats to our existence.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Dan, we're going to have to ask you to come back just to talk about this.
Yeah.
Because we know
Sure.
you also have a book in the works on
I do.
on these issues as well. So we've got to just segue into the most existential crisis of all, right? Aging and dealing with our sexuality when society still wants to say you're not supposed to be sexual anymore.
Or you can be sexual, but you have to be sexual like you were
used to. Right. It's the change
used to be
the biggest problem, not the sex.
Right. That's right. That's that's really the key. And I said on Sunday, one of my assumptions, on the slides that you were talking about was something like restoring erections does not necessarily restore sexual happiness.
Exactly.
For sure.
Exactly.
Restoring function doesn't restore happiness, I think is what I said. And this is a good example of that.
You really see this this kind of panic in adult children after the loss of a parent, with the widowed parent, after they born sufficiently and want to start dating. And the adult kids are freaking out. Like, what do you mean you want to start dating? You're 85 years old. Come on.
Right. Well, that's a how dare you make me think of you being sexual.
That's exactly right.
Although
exactly
I also just remembered before we lost Dad, may he rest in peace, we did ask him if he had any interest in dating. And his answer kind of surprised us both, I think. He said, "Oh, I don't want to see an 85-year-old woman naked." Pretty hard to argue, Dad.
but again, even with that, there was an existential thing that was really about, looking at what he went through with Mom and not wanting to go through and not wanting to be so connected to death again. I think it really, there's also kind of a psychodynamic, a little Freudian underpinning with some of that too, with those, the eros and the thanatos and, sort of those rivers that were flowing in.
Right. The difference with Freud, Freud had death anxiety of his own. And so he never really talked about death. He always talked about how death gets sublimated, or repressed. He never wanted to talk about death, and that is what concerns a lot of the people that we see. When your penis changes, when your vagina changes, it's an indication that the bulk of life is behind you, not in front of you. And these are issues of mortality that create existential panics.
Wow.
So
Yeah, it's a great perspective. I can really see how that is much more of a foundation. Right? And again, the meaning of the meaning in people's lives that we really do have to get to, that it's so much more. I mean, that's the driver of the behavior. We get focused and we get, I think, distracted by the behavior.
Right. I think traditionally as sex therapists, we have not asked enough of why is this happening? What does this mean? We've just targeted the symptom, which is effective sometimes. I mean, I'm not saying it's not, but there are many other cases of people who are experiencing conflict at a deeper level that that we don't address. And so I think this helps, bridge that gap a little bit. And the tentative title, the working title of my book is The Existential Importance of the Penis, a guide to understanding the sexuality of men.
Nice.
Really looking forward to that.
Well, and now that you're officially a Floridian, welcome to the nation's most phallic state.
That's right.
And so it's good to know that you're close by and we can have you again soon to continue this conversation. Because I also want to ask you more about applying these principles in the counseling room or the Zoom room, as the case may be.
Always happy to do it. Always happy to come back and talk to you guys.
Dan, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Really.
Again,
my pleasure.
Dr. Daniel Water, sex therapist extraordinaire and existentialist. And I suspect that your minority status will change in the coming year.
I'm working on it.
Yes. Good.
Yeah.
So until we meet again.
Indeed. Thank you so much.
For
Stay well.
back.
Pleasure, guys. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you, Dr. Water. Again, always inspiring, enlightening, and I know I'm probably as embarrassed saying it as you are hearing it, but I really do mean it. I hope I will continue to learn from you, and I hope you keep doing what you're doing. So we're all old men.
Indeed. And, it's still kind of been referring to, and he even kind of referred to that perspective, that existential approach, and saying kind of an old school, sort of an older kind of idea. Yet I don't know, especially after talking with him, if I can think of something more timely to where people are in their lives right now and everything that's been going on. Look at what COVID has done. If there has ever been this mass existential crisis that people have been sharing, this is it.
Yeah.
We look at wars, we look at violence in the street. There's several mass shootings every single day in this country. That's not an existential threat. Yeah. And with all these things that we're, I'm kind of amazed now that any guy can get it up with all this stuff going on.
Right. Yeah.
Right? It seems like that's the such a casualty.
Yeah.
On so many levels. So I really appreciate what Dan was saying about that, and it really is an approach. It really did make a little shift in me already, right? In how I'm thinking about this, and how I have always been thinking about that. That's also something that I appreciate being able to see.
To realize that we've always had a little thread. We've always had a existential therapist in us without knowing it.
Indeed.
Right?
So thank you for bringing that out as well, Dan. Again, one final toast. Really appreciate it and look forward to continuing this conversation.
Yes, indeed.
And that will do it for this week's Sex Talk with the Siegel Brothers. Thank you, my brother.
Thank you.
Thank you all for tuning in and watching. And once again, if you would, make sure you hit that subscribe, share it, get it out there, help us continue to grow, spread that word, and, let's hear from you. Put something in the comments. Definitely love to continue a dialogue with a lot of this as well.
Indeed. And we'll be here next Friday and every Friday at 7 p.m. East Coast time for more Sex Talk with the Siegel Brothers.
Indeed. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night. Stay well.
Thanks for watching Sex Talk with the Siegel Brothers. Join us each week on Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern. You You can also follow us on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel to stay on top of the latest developments in the ever-changing world of sex and sexuality.